Good afternoon. Welcome to the MIALA Annual Conference virtual breakout session. I am your session moderator, Mike Duffy. I have a few housekeeping items to share with you. We ask that you keep your microphone on mute until you need to ask a question. And we also ask that you mute your video unless you are asking a question. You can ask your questions at any time by entering them into the chat panel. We will be saving all questions until the end of the presentation. After this session, please take a moment to provide feedback to our presenters by filling out the session's evaluation form located in the conference portal. Today's presentation is Michigan Digital Preservation Network, updates on Michigan's efforts to protect our cultural and scholarly history. And your presenters are Paul Gallagher, Chelsea Denault, Richard Adler, Lindsay Hiltonen, Jeffrey Daniels, and Brian Whitledge.
Wonderful. Anything else, Mike, or do I take it away?
That's it. Go for it.
All right. Wonderful. Well, welcome, everybody. And thanks for carving the time out. I know we're a bit delayed getting started today, but we couldn't be more excited to see you. My name is Paul Gallagher. I'm the Associate Dean for Resources and Digital Strategies at WMU. And my role today is just to serve as a moderator with all of these experts and great folks to talk about the work with MDPN. So as Mike just said, we've got Brian Whitledge with us, who's the archivist for University Digital Records at Clark Historical Library within Central Michigan University. And Brian has been part of a rather impressive project of a very functional digital preservation environment that's tracking over 30 terabytes of digital content. Jeffrey Daniels is the Associate Dean of Curation, Publishing, and Preservation Services at Grand Valley State University. And he serves on the MDPN Governance Committee and works closely with library faculty and staff supporting that work at GVSU. Lindsay Hiltonen is the University Archivist and a PhD student at Michigan Technological University. She's also a member of the MDPN Advisory Council, the membership subcommittee, and also on the governance board for Uplink. Rick Adler is the coordinator of the Michigan Service Hub, which helps institutions throughout the state share their collection metadata with the Digital Public Library of America and the state-based portal Michigan Memories. Rick's position is really complementary to the work we're doing here and what Chelsea's efforts with a focus on access along her focus on preservation. And he works for the University of Michigan Library. And last, and certainly not least, Dr. Chelsea Denault is the Michigan Digital Preservation Network Coordinator, sponsored by IMLS and housed at MCLS. Chelsea is working with libraries, museums, archives, historical societies, and other cultural heritage organizations throughout Michigan to develop a financially sustainable digital preservation network. As a last note, Chelsea's a Michigan native, and just before joining us all, successfully defended her dissertation in public history at Loyola University, Chicago. And so what we're going to do first is we're going to hand it over to Chelsea first, and she's going to give us a walkthrough and an update on the efforts of MDPN. And then we're going to come back to this great panel and have some questions to help inform all of you about topics and things going on with digital preservation in Michigan. So with that, Chelsea, take it away.
Awesome. Oh, excuse me. Thank you, Paul. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Oh, maybe I'm not. We just worked this out, but apparently, oh, there we go. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here, as Paul said. And I am just going to run through a quick Digital Preservation 101 and an introduction to the MDPN so that we can all enjoy our panelist discussion with a kind of shared language and a shared understanding of what we're talking about. Oh, I skipped a slide already. So what is digital preservation? It's really helpful to think about digital preservation in this kind of tri-pronged model. You really need to have a combination of digital content, first of all, and that can be digitized or born digital content. You need to have people who are doing the management of that content, making sure that it continues to be accessible and usable. And finally, you need technology to help with those management tasks. So it's really helpful to think of it in these three ways, especially as we go through these next few definitions. So what is digital preservation? It's a series of managed activities necessary to ensure continued access to digital materials for as long as necessary. And this definition comes to us from the Digital Preservation Handbook, the Digital Preservation Coalition. And I like to break this definition down because I think it helps explain a little bit more what we're really talking about. So managed activities, again, going back to management in my little model that I just showed you, this tells us that digital preservation requires a variety of things to be done, and that we need to be proactive and systematic about how we approach tasks and issues. And also that digital preservation is an ongoing process and not just a one-off solution. Continued access. This reminds us the ultimate aim of digital preservation is maintaining access to and usability of content. One of my favorite things to say to this point from Trevor Owens, who I'll talk about actually later, in his book, The Craft and Theory of Digital Preservation, he reminds us that preservation without usability is just hoarding. And we're not hoarders. So we want to make sure that we can continue using our content. Digital materials, right? This includes digitized materials, but also born digital materials, both of which we often have in our libraries and our archives. And then finally, as long as necessary, and this depends on organizational context, right? It could be a few years in line with regulatory requirements. It could be when the information is no longer needed. Usually though, for collections of cultural heritage, which is what we deal with here at the MDPN, this means in perpetuity. So we have a big task ahead of us. Oops. And then one final definition, because I think Trevor Owens, who's the head of digital content at the Library of Congress, I think he really gets at something different about digital preservation in these definitions. Ultimately, the craft of digital preservation is that ongoing dialogue between the affordances of media, the intentions of creators and curators, and the institutional commitments of resources that enable preservation, right? Those are all very important. Resources, creators, media. And then finally, digital preservation is not about a particular system or a series of preservation actions. It's about preparing content and collections for the first in a great chain of handoffs, which I think really speaks to how a lot of us feel about our digital and our physical collections, and how we see ourselves as stewards of those materials for the time being. What digital preservation is not. It is not digitization. I get this question a lot, as does Rick, I think. Right, digitization is the process of turning physical materials into digital materials. Digital preservation is part of that life cycle of a digital object, but it is not digitization. It's not just the cloud, right? Just dumping your content into a website, Amazon or Google, and saying, well, that's fine. Because you lose that management piece. You lose that person who's checking on the content and making sure that it's continued to be usable and accessible. Similar with a storage or backup to some kind of hard media, but even more dangerous than the cloud, right? Because physical media is at risk of bit rot and failure. So that's not digital preservation either. And similarly, it's not a one and done, set and forget it solution, even if it's a vendor system that says, right, it's all you need is this. Again, you're losing that management piece, you're losing the people piece, which brings me to the last point. It's not a solely technical problem. You really need the involvement of people to really have a true digital preservation program and system. There are many elements of digital preservation, and I do want to be mindful of our time here for our panelists. I won't go very much into this, but you can see there are a lot of steps that need to be managed by curators and content creators, which we all do at the MDPN. So why should you care about preservation, right? It's all about collection stewardship, which I mentioned previously. Legal reasons as well. Maybe you need to keep records safe for taxes or for whatever sort of purposes you might need. The digital pivot, right, insert grown here, as institutions have created more digital content, it's very important that we make sure we protect that investment of time and energy and money. And to that point as well, it's an insurance policy of sorts, right? You've invested so much money into creating digital content, and we need to make sure that it's safe, not only from human error or from bit rot, but also from natural disasters. Today is the 1-year anniversary of the Midland floods. And it's just a reminder that we need to not only be thinking about physical materials, but how we protect our digital materials. But there's challenges to digital preservation, namely cost. It's not cheap, and expertise. It takes a lot of good folks working on this who have the knowledge. And so what is the Michigan Digital Preservation Network? The MDPN is a new initiative sponsored by the Library of Michigan to explore community and member-centered solutions to digital preservation based on a broad sharing of resources and expertise. This really allows us to onboard smaller organizations who might be less resourced or have less technical expertise by sharing the expertise from larger institutions or sharing the resources of larger institutions. And I've just been so touched by everyone who's on this call and on this panel for their continued commitment to that vision. And so with that, I just thought I would take a second to call out a couple of our many wonderful partners here, especially IMLS and the Library of Michigan, who have provided our funding. And with that, I will turn it over to Paul to start our talk.
All right, well, thank you for that update, Chelsea. And so I'll tell the panelists, you can feel free to unmute yourself at will, and we'll start a discussion here. But let me put out our first question to all of you. Why digital preservation? And what really drove you to get involved in the work that MDPN is doing? And whoever wants to start first, feel free.
I'll jump in, Paul. This is Jeffrey from Grand Valley State University. Our involvement was pretty early on. Matt Schultz ran a Stepping Stones project that was grant related, and that was the very beginnings of this organizational structure. There was an MOU signed in October 2019. So Grand Valley was one of the early people involved in this particular discussion, and we thought it was important then. We think it's important now.
Others like to chime in on that?
I can jump in too. I started working at Michigan Tech in 2014, and right around that time, our current digital platform that was maintaining our photographs for the CUNA Digital Archive was a homegrown system, and it was nearing obsolescence. So one of the first major roles that I had at Michigan Tech was working with our technology team and the archives team to develop a task force essentially to do some investigation into digital asset management platforms, figure out a way that we could get it was like 13,000 digital assets into a safer environment and figure out ways that we can get it into essentially a better platform that then we could talk about not just our digitization program and our digital assets, but then how we can take that big, bold step into digital preservation initiatives. So I think some of those conversations that were taking place, like in the Upper Peninsula among colleagues, is what got me in touch with colleagues downstate, like just through MAA and other casual conversations happening at other regional and national conferences. So that's where my interest came from, is that we were at a near crisis mode and we just didn't have the capacity to deal with it on our own.
Fascinating point, that oops or oh no moment, and kind of drove you into, wow, preservation would have been important here, right? Other perspectives.
My perspective is a little bit different. As you mentioned, I mean, I'm sort of the access side and Chelsea's on the preservation side. But from my perspective, the work I've been doing since 2016 on behalf of the Michigan Service Hub and trying to make records more accessible throughout Michigan and throughout the US and beyond, you can have the best platform for access in the world. it's not going to be much use if you don't have records to share through it. And so I see the promise of the MDPN as making sure that institutions in Michigan, particularly the smaller ones and the ones that have very limited technical resources, are going to have a place to store their records for the various longest of terms in a reliable and safe manner. And so that when the day comes when I can reach out to institutions in other parts of the state, they will have a place to put their records so that they'll be there, then we can work together on them.
And here at Central Michigan University, we're kind of a hub for digital newspapers in the state, working with the Library of Congress, National Digital Newspaper Project, and some other things. So we've digitized over 1 million pages of newspapers, and we have all these files, and that's years and years of labor. And so the question is, what do you do with these files? You know, I mean, they are recreatable, but that's years and years of labor. So the question is kind of what to do. So that's one aspect of the Clark. And then the other one is that my job was tasked with creating a digital preservation environment at Central Michigan University and handling records management. It was kind of twofold. Yeah, so that's just, it's kind of being foisted upon those of us who do it. But then at the same time, we realize, like what Rick said, there are some people who want to do this and they just don't have the tools or the needs. And so then it's how can we, I don't want to say necessarily give back, but what can we add to to everybody to make it work better? I mean, it takes a community, and we're building a community.
Great, and thanks for that, Brian. Chelsea, do you want to say anything further?
Again, I think everyone's answers just really highlight the fact that we have such a strong group. We've only been really building the MDPN for a year, and it's so surprising to see where we are. And it has to do with everyone here who really believes in that mission and the value of digital preservation. So all I can do here is say thank you so much to all the people on this call.
It stands out to me. We put in for this presentation 2 years ago. We didn't have a name. I think the name had just came up. Chelsea wasn't on board yet. So how far we came. Let me switch gears to another question, though. We know, digital preservation, it's expensive. It has costs around it. There's equipment in some cases, not always, but hardware. There's staff time. But having no solution in Michigan has a greater cost. And to the panelists, what thoughts and concerns does this raise for you? Or maybe a better question, what is the costs of inaction? What could that mean if we don't invest our time, money, and resources now to help provide a solution longer term?
I'll just go back to those digital newspaper things I mentioned. I mean, that's right. You can quantify 2 FTE 10 years of labor really easily, and that's all the digital newspapers. They were on something called network attached storage. Nobody needs to know what that is if you don't. But the NAS was getting overloaded, and the NAS a couple times red lights flashed on it and things shut down, and we said, oh, holy cow. That's really scary when you start saying, okay, 2 FTE, we'll just say, with compensation packages and whatnot, comes out to $110,000 a year times 10 years. Oh my gosh, we have $1 million worth of labor invested in this box, and that box is blinking red lights. So I think that's one way that you can quantify it. Then there's also the personal investment that, okay, so we have this wonderful pictures that we've digitized, or we have wonderful born digital photographs that have been transferred to us, 1 million images from the campus photographer. And if those disappeared, nobody else is going to have the pictures of the homecoming court from 2004. It's gone forever. And that would break my heart as the person who handles university archives. That's my job. And so there's the tangible, measurable cost, but there's also that intangible, just really, really a bummer cost.
Yeah, the intangible cost really speaks to me. And that's why I'm so excited to be a part of MDPN. I'm a native Yooper. I was born and raised in the Copper Country. And to me, the aspect of representation and truly building a statewide network is so important. So if we were to, leverage resources, but have a lot of the core activities take place downstate, which a lot of times that happens in not just our fields, but in other fields like the Upper Peninsula tends to sometimes get neglected or forgotten, or just maybe represented in an anecdotal way. But the fact that we're moving forward with purpose in a way that we're trying to truly create a statewide network, that we want to uplift those rural agencies that maybe don't have the capacity to participate in a program such as this, we're trying to make that happen. So I mean, the cost of inaction would be so huge and devastating, because people that have long been forgotten would continue to be so in an even greater capacity, to a great loss for our state and our culture.
We don't even,
Yeah,
we
I'd
also
like to
need
go ahead, Rich.
okay, thanks. It's not just a question of having a sort of institutional answer, but we also need to have a cross-institutional solution, which is another appeal of what we're doing here. I think a lot about, again, smaller institutions where you may have one person at that institution who knows where all the records are, who's been maintaining things, where the tacit knowledge of the institution is actually in that person's head. We have people like that retiring all the time. And the thing about having the MDPN is that it moves that knowledge and the knowledge of those records, the catalogs of those records, from individuals in these smaller institutions scattered across the state to a collective action that is going to, in and of itself, just the people involved will help keep these records known and help keep people aware that these records even exist. So that if a critical person in a critical place retires or takes a different job, moves somewhere else, there will be people here who will remember those records are there and can keep them in the mix of the resources available to the state of Michigan.
I've been thinking that last piece of Paul's question, the cost of inaction, and we've had these questions for a while now, and this is the one that I just keep turning over and over in my head. And Lindsay mentioned the rural agencies. So there are a lot of us here from universities, but we also have small historical societies across the state. And quite often, these are those smaller groups that don't have the resourcing, the expertise, or the staffing to preserve these very unique cultural entities. The state of Michigan has 12 federally recognized tribal governments. The indigenous peoples in the state, just look at a list of our counties. So many of the words that we use day to day come from these indigenous peoples. And we are risking losing that cultural heritage. And I think one of the most important things at this point in time is dismantling white supremacy culture. And I think that's one of the things we need to be doing. And I really think that preserving these smaller agencies is a step in that direction.
Let's see, it's interesting in hearing everyone's comments. One of the pieces that's really stood out here goes to one of the questions I have on my list is, why a community-based solution? And it's been interesting. We've talked, it's equally important to be able to doing this together as opposed to going it alone. It's not just something an individual institution can be as effective with. So, why a community-based solution? What does that mean for the work of MDPN?
Paul, for me, it's about expertise. We've got these people involved in the Michigan Digital Preservation Network, and you just have to look around a room in a meeting, and the amount of expertise at the table is not an amount that any single entity could pull together at one point in time. So just leveraging the experience and the knowledge of the entire state, I think puts us all forward.
Yeah, I started here at Central Michigan University as digital archivist and record manager, tasked with building a digital preservation environment. It's a lot of work. It's very tough. I had to fight with IT to get permissions in order to do some things with a Linux VirtualBox so I could try to run Archivematica, and I failed on it multiple times. I have come up with something that uses some free open source software to do checksums that I then use a find if function in an Excel spreadsheet, which can only go up to 1 million lines before you shut down your Excel spreadsheet in order to do my check. I have all this. It's a lot of work. It's taken me a couple years, and it's a ton of work. If I could look to Lindsay and Rick and Jeffrey and say, hey, do you guys have a tool? And they could tell me, there's my community. And all of a sudden it's a lot better. And I am resourced at Central Michigan University. And as people have mentioned, there are a lot of under-resourced staffs at other institutions throughout the state, whether it's a local historical society, tribal library archives, other university archives, and also even state institutions. We're all kind of under-resourced, and being able to lean on our colleagues is great.
Yeah, there's also an education piece to a collective and a collaborative approach. Talking about the idea of expertise, it's not just so much a concept, it's also something that we can put into action as we demonstrate how to go through some of the methodology of preservation for digital objects. And I think we also know that a collaborative approach works. We've seen it in some of the smaller regional entities up here, not in a digital preservation standpoint alone, but we're stepping into that also. But I think, like looking at examples from other folks in our field for other types of projects, we know that resourcing and leveraging those resources and sharing knowledge has been effective for other types of initiatives. So let's just take that and run with it and make it grow even further.
I think having multiple institutions involved in an effort like this also is an encouragement to keep to standards. If you have something that's built in-house, there's a strong tendency to start customizing things to the benefit of your particular institution. And before you know it, you may be far afield from what has proven to be more reliable among a larger number of institutions over a period of time. So I think it kind of keeps you honest. It kind of keeps you in line with maintaining standards, which is probably going to be the best way to go for your institution and for the other ones involved in an effort like this.
And just one other thing that struck me as everybody's talked, none of us talked about like the most base thing that's here, but it's also cheaper. I mean, I hate to say it, but when Rick said built in-house, okay, so you build it in-house and you're paying $90,000 in benefits, compensation, and everything to a developer. That's a developer. That's not an archivist, right? And tech developers are not archivists. Don't. That should be one thing that's not confused. I think a lot of times people seed code as somebody who can write in code as, oh, well, they can do my job. No, they can't do what we do. They can make it happen. So you have that, and then oh my God, you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars to build an in-house solution. And if I could get away with paying, less than 10,000 for a year to know everything's secure, and hopefully, if I'm a small institution, a historical society, maybe less than 1,000 to hold it all for a year. That's a really big benefit for the community aspect, because building in-house is so expensive. And I understand that's very base and like not a glamorous thing to talk about, but it is a big concern.
Well, thanks for that. Let me kind of switch gears to a little different question, but an equally important one. What does success look like here? And, what would that mean to your institution? And, Chelsea, maybe because I have a very related question I'll bring forward when we get to the Q&A at the end, but, what does it look like for MDPN? And then I'll let the others go through, because I think we'll all have different perspectives.
Yeah, this is something that I think about a lot, Paul, a lot. And to me, I think it goes back to one of the very first conversations that I had with Matt Schultz, who Jeff mentioned earlier, kind of kickstarted ran the project that was the predecessor to MDPN. I really look to the Stepping Stones project as the spiritual ancestor, so to speak, of MDPN. But to me, success looks like small institutions buying into this, community of practitioners and using the system in a robust way. I really think that if there's not buy-in and use from small institutions, this project will have, to some extent, failed. That's a really big word to use, the word fail, for something that could otherwise, by all other measures, membership dollars and members included and content ingested, it could be a success, but I think that we need to prioritize, and everyone here has said this as well, we really need to prioritize making sure that there's an on-ramp for small organizations to use the system.
other perspectives, what's success look like to your institution? How do you know when we've met the threshold?
Once or twice in my career, I've been accused of being flippant, and I promise that is not my intention here. But success for me would look like the network is here. It is a still active and thriving network. There's been a lot of work put into this as we got started. And if in 5 years' time, we are still chugging along and bringing on new agencies and whatnot, that's success.
I think that's fair. And, just to echo what Chelsea was saying, like, I do think having that buy-in from the smaller institutions is going to be essential. And not just that, but having meaningful and sustainable ways to continue to interact with our members and make sure that they're feeling that their voices are heard, and how the network is governed and how changes are taking place and things of this nature. And then also to see a real strong use value coming out of what we're helping be preserved, like making sure that we're advocating for meaningful access, but also coming up with creative ways for community groups or students or Michigan History Day participants or people to actually get in and use this stuff that we're working so hard to preserve. I really hope that it doesn't just end up being something that goes by the wayside, but we're advocating for it to be built into curricula or to community projects or exhibits, or just figuring out a way that the stuff that's being saved is being seen.
Well, hopefully it'll all just get dumped into Michigan Memories, right, Rick?
Ideally. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm one step removed from MDPN, because access is not normally what you think about in terms of like a digital preservation network, and yet, like I was saying earlier, I see it as essential to certainly what I do. I'm tempted to be even more flippant than Jeffrey about making a comment about well, it'll be a success the first time an institution would have lost records if it were not for MDPN. Maybe that's a little too grim, but that'll be a sign of success if nothing else is.
I was, that was kind of my thought. Actually, a sign of success is the first time I get a report back that says all your checksums were verified. It's alive. That would just be wonderful. But there's two other signs of success. 50 years from now, somebody says, do you know where XYZ is? Oh yeah, it's in here. Its unique identifier is X. Contact the people at whatever the name of the institution is by that point. I mean, I would like to know that unique identifiers I put in for materials next year, let's say, would be useful 50 years from now for a reason. Another part of success, and this is really egotistical, is you've talked to people from Texas, Chelsea, you've talked to people from Alabama, you've talked to people from Indiana. I would like people to say, I'm going to Michigan. They've got a system that works. I'm going to Michigan. I need to talk to the people at Michigan. They know. I think that would be really good. We do so many great things here in this state, and this is one that we're actually doing really well too.
We just have a few minutes before we switch into Q&A. So why don't I do this? I have a question that came through the chat. Why don't we address that one? And then we'll see as other ones come in. But a question that came through the chat was, am I understanding correctly that MDPN can provide the platform for storing our digital objects as well as the metadata? And Chelsea, feel free to, maybe you can start putting some information for us.
Sure. So right now, the answer is no. But in the future, yes. I don't want folks to think that the MDPN is a hosting site, right? It's not a place where you can put content for the public to then access it in sort of a content DM sense. What I do, but maybe I'm just misunderstanding the person's question. What the MDPN will do is preserve the digitized object and its metadata together in what we call a bag. And that bag then sits together, the object and the metadata, on the preservation network. And that's how you run the checksums. I didn't get a chance to do this this part of my presentation, but basically you run, like Brian said a couple of times, you run through a checksum. We hope every 60 to 90 days, we're still discussing the cost benefit analysis of doing that, or the timing of it. But you know, you just continue checking that checksum against the metadata and the object. And as long as they both match, you have a continually preserved item. That made it sound really simple, like anyone can do it. Sorry.
So if I heard your statement right, so it's really, it's more than just the storage, and it's not really the access either. I think that was kind of Rick's perspective, but there is a technology piece that's being thought of. I think that might have been the root of the question.
Okay. Yeah, and if I misunderstood the person's question, like, and they want a follow-up question, feel free, maybe this is not my place to say, but feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question.
Sure.
So it is now 5:21. So now we go to our live Q&A. If you do have a question you'd like to ask the presenters, please go ahead and raise your hand. You can use the reactions button at the bottom of your screen. If you click on reactions and then raise hand, I will watch for that. Thank you very much to our presenters.
Thank you. We'll pause for a minute here and see what questions you may have. It's been a long year of uncomfortable pauses on WebEx. That's okay. We'll give it a few more seconds.
Maybe I'll just put a quick plug in, Paul, while people maybe mull over what questions they might have. We have 3 subcommittees right now who are helping to organize different aspects of the MDPN's future. So, and many of the, actually all of the folks who are on the panel are members of those different subcommittees. So we have one subcommittee looking at membership, so that they discuss membership benefits, they discuss what kinds of education opportunities we might see for members. They're helping to put together our member summit, which I will plug, is June 15th. So do check up on our website. That's mypres, MIPRES.org for updates about that. We have a tech committee, which deals with all of the fun infrastructure questions. And we have a governance committee, which is focused on creating some model for member-run governance, which I think gets back to a point that Lindsay made that I wanted to highlight, that having voices at the table, I think that's a big sign of success. And our governance committee has been committed to that, which is great. Oh, thank you, Lindsay, for dropping our website into the chat while I was talking. See, already the community.
Let me ask a follow-up, because it was another great question that came through the chat, Chelsea. How does the recruitment, how do you recruit organizations to join, especially smaller organizations? What is is the membership open yet? What does that look like?
Well, we hope to start recruiting members after our member summit, again, June 15th. There's a lot of different ways that we've already been conducting outreach to, especially to smaller organizations. I do want to emphasize the work that Lindsay does through Uplink. Uplink has already committed to being a member of the MDPN, so we'll be serving all of their digital preservation needs. And I think that's a great gateway to many small organizations in the Upper Peninsula. And so for me, that was a huge win, to be able to already be able to do that good work for folks in the UP. We also have been working very closely with Dr. Sharon Carlson, who's the president of the Historical Society of Michigan. She's already been connecting us with historical societies who have digital collections and have questions about preservation. And honestly, one of the best ways that we've been able to reach out to small organizations is through the Library of Michigan's LSTA grant program. that because the MDPN is funded by the Library of Michigan, it provides us with a great connection point to those other small organizations who are going through the digitization process. It allows us to connect with them and talk to them about digital preservation even before they have a digital collection made, which it's really nice to get that education in early. And I hope, my hope is that once we have some of the larger institutions as members, whether it's Central Michigan or whether it's Grand Valley or whether it's any of the institutions, represented on our panel here, I really hope that those institutions do their own outreach, right? I'm sure that there's historical societies or community museums or libraries that y'all are connected with. And it means a lot for us, for you to have the faith in us to say, here is a digital preservation solution that we use and that we trust. Won't you come and use it too? So yeah, those are some ways that we're talking to small organizations, but happy to hear of other methods that folks might know of.
Great. Well, thank you for that, Chelsea. I just saw another question come through in the chat. I wonder if you have any comments about how your efforts may also relate to institutional efforts around their tangible collection. I'm thinking especially of the smaller organizations. Of course, digital preservation is its own endeavor, but I wondered if that has come up in conversations.
Yeah, I don't want to dominate the conversation here, but or the Q&A. But this is something that especially that Rick and I talk a lot about. Given our complementary missions, right? You can't have digital objects on a website or digitally preserved unless those objects are digital. So one of the things that we have often talked about is how do you provide an on-ramp for an education around digitization? Luckily, the Library of Michigan is hiring a new digitization coordinator who will work with museums and libraries and archives across the state. So once that individual is onboarded, I will be so happy to direct all of the digitization questions that I get from institutions to that person. But I'm also really looking forward to having this kind of trifecta of expertise when it comes to the life cycle of digital objects for all sorts of institutions across Michigan. So,
Likewise.
Yeah.
And I think just to give another example from the Upper Peninsula, there's other networks that exist. So Chelsea did mention Uplink, which is spearheaded out of Northern with Marcus Robbins. And we actually just had our first governance meeting earlier this week. But as we're working through like that digital process and figuring things out for the Upper Peninsula, we're dealing with a lot of institutions that are potential members of Uplink or that we know through other networks that do have concerns about their tangible collections. So I mean, as we're having these efforts related to the digital preservation component, we're still having real world conversations about how to contend with a small historical society, for instance, that has a lot of archival materials in a warehouse or an outbuilding that isn't environmentally secure, or what they can do with their volunteer base to better arrange and describe or provide access to the physical collections that they have. As you well may know, a lot of these institutions are volunteer based. They don't always have the expertise in the field to do things as we would in a different type of setting. So I mean, trying to offer consulting services to them or to provide one-on-one type education to give them enough tools to sustain on their meager budgets and the meager human service hours they have, or sorry, human labor hours that they have. But it's definitely a part of these conversations, even if it's not directly impacting MDPN's work, it's still a part of that larger conversation because it's all interwoven, like we're interconnecting in so many ways, and physical collections is always going to be a part of that piece.
And I just want to kind of build off of Lindsay's wonderful point there. And that to me is one of the other important reasons why building a community around MDPN is so important, right? I took one class in archives to get my public history master's degree. I do not consider myself an archival expert, but I know of people in the MDPN community who I would be able to direct a historical society or an archive to if they came to me with those concerns. And that to me is kind of the wonderful part about the community I'm hoping we build around MDPN, and which I think is already there, just small. And so, yeah.
In
So-
Michigan, oh, sorry about that.
It's 5:30, so our presentation time is finished, and I need to end the session. So I would like to recognize all of the presenters. Thank you very much for presenting today. And that has to be it for now. So thank you very much. If you have any further questions, I'm sure the presenters would love to get correspondence about that. Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you, everybody.